Hello everyone, and welcome back to the RimWorld Space Pirate series in Save Our Ship 2, where, my good friends, if you remember from the end of last episode, we are under attack. The UNSC has found us once more and sent one of their corvettes, no doubt absolutely filled to the brim with Marines, ODSTs, and maybe even a few Spartans. As it stands, we are currently still under heavy fire, but our shields are managing to hold out, at least those areas that are still covered by shields, that is. Hopefully the shields can hold out long enough for our shuttle to reach the enemy corvette so we can try to infiltrate it. Uh-oh. Well, it looks like the shield generator in the front of our ship has already gave out, which I'm sure, as you could imagine, is not ideal. We are attempting to shoot down as many torpedoes as we can, as well as launching our own at the corvette. Given the overwhelming odds and military power of the UNSC, we decided to send some backup reinforcements to Henry and Sam in the Battletoad. Speaking of which, the two of them had recently landed themselves in the shuttle car and began firing upon the airlocks of the corvette to try and bust a hole in so that we could infiltrate. Understandably, this would attract the attention of our adversaries, luring them outside where we could fire at them with rockets. However, more of them began coming out than we had anticipated, Spartans included. They would take cover behind our own shuttle, giving us the only option that we had, to run out into the open with our rockets and try to run all around, hopefully causing them to miss us in the process. Our reinforcements did, however, arrive though in the form of Ryan and Porkins. Unfortunately, our enemies were too close for us to use the mortar on top of the Battletoad, so Ryan and Porkins would also be forced to fight on foot, trying to take cover in the crevices of the corvette itself. This battle was quite chaotic. We tried to focus on the Spartan for a while, and then the Spartan threw down a shield pack, so we tried to stay away from them, and then they began chasing us with their huge UNSC kookery, which ended up working out in our favor though, drawing them into our gunfire where we could take them down. Back home, things were just as shitty though. A bunch of ODSTs had dropped in right in the ship and were attacking Tiny. The captain would come into the storage room to try and take care of this, but there were still plenty outside as well. The new parts of the trade ship wreckage we added to the Reaper is basically crawling with him. Things weren't exactly hunky-dory back at the corvette either. We were under heavy fire and were trying to tend to Henry before he bled to death behind the Battletoad. Ryan would stay with him while Porkins and Sam tried to infiltrate the corvette itself. Normally, I would go straight for a control room instead of the weapons, but because of the damage being done to the Reaper, I was afraid what would happen if I didn't. Luckily though, this ended up leading us to the control room. It appeared that the pilot Marine planned on putting up a good fight against us, but he didn't have a space helmet on, and he couldn't breathe, and thus we took him down pretty easily. After that, Sam went in to attempt to hack the terminal, while Porkins finished off the Marine. The first attempt at hacking though was a complete failure, and thus we would try again. During which time the corvette was still attacking the Reaper, so I would have Porkins go in towards the laser turrets and begin trying to EMP them. Thankfully though, he could stop as we had successfully taken over the corvette finally, and let me be the first to say that that was a very difficult fight. We may have taken the corvette, but we paid a hefty toll. Not only had the Star Reaper been torn apart basically, but unfortunately, Tiny had lost his life as well. We attended to his previous wounds, but he was ambushed by yet another ODST as the captain was fighting more of them off. We had managed to capture one of the ODSTs, not the same one that killed Tiny of course, as we would have definitely executed them, but hopefully she will join our ranks. In the meantime, Henry was severely injured, even losing his left foot, though thankfully he was alive. We would begin exploring each room of the corvette to see what was in it and to ensure that we didn't have any Marines stowing away looking to shoot us in the back of the head. During this time, we just so happened to come across a very large stockpile of Forerunner metal in the cargo bay. Many of you guys have said that I should use it for building on the ships, but I don't know. I think it might also be more useful for trading. I suppose we'll have to see. Either way though, regardless, we need to move the corvette over to the Reaper, which we ended up doing. We didn't even have to use the salvage bay, as it has its own engines and power still. Now this does bring me to a comment by our compadre Vlad Skullcrusher, who actually left a comment a few episodes back talking about how we should do a separate ship that's kind of like a big escape pod, or even an invasion pod that we could basically use to attack settlements and things like that. Personally, I think that's a really kick-ass idea, and Vlad has also asked me to name it the Dart. So I believe this Corvette will be that ship, and we will indeed be naming it the Dart. So thank you once again, Vlad, for your wonderful suggestion. However, before we go and dock the Corvette onto the Reaper, we are going to be rebuilding the front portion here, not only because of the damage that was done to it from the torpedoes, but also because basically it was wreckage at this point, since it is from the trade ship from the previous episode that we captured. The process of doing this will take several days, so I won't bore you with the details, and we'll move on to something else for the time being, such as the fact that Adam, our ship AI, is completely missing from our roster here. It would appear that the Reaper must have lost power during the battle at some point, and thus his physical form was also lost, but we brought him back out, thankfully. I then decided to do something that I've been wanting to do for a little while, mostly just for aesthetic purposes, but I feel like our AI doesn't really look like a pirate AI, so I changed that. Well, sort of. He just has a duster and some armor on now. I would have gave him a cowboy hat, but I felt like it would be a little bit too similar to the captain's. Speaking of the captain, he had requested a trade ship not too long ago, and thus we would decide to end up selling them many of our weapons that we've received from our previous battles. In exchange, they provided us with some torpedoes, some components which would be crucial to our upgrades of the ship, as well as some power armor and a power armor helmet. We ended up giving the Locust power armor to the captain and the new power armor EVA helmet to Boyd, as well as Captain Udo's old ODST armor that he's been wearing this entire time. I'm glad we got him an upgrade because he's had that on since before we even named the ship, I believe, let alone took off back into space. As we were repairing the front portion of the ship during this time, I would also have a small squad of people come out and begin destroying all these enemy shuttles that we have piled up around it. Once again, truly, I do wish there was a way for us to claim these. It would really help us out, but unfortunately we'll just have to settle for the resources. Now that things are at least somewhat sorted out on the ship, we could also go back down to the planet's surface and bury our good friend Tiny. By this point though, we had already long since abandoned our resource outpost, so we will be burying Tiny here next to this beautiful tree nestled in between these gorgeous, huge mountains. As the glistening snow begins to fall upon our armor and our heads, we lay to rest yet another friend, not only a crewmate or pirate, but a friend. We began to wonder what would become of poor baby Jingles, as she is now what Zap Zap was as a child as well. An orphan. But is she truly an orphan? As long as she is surrounded by our crew and under the captain's watch, she is always with family. It's hard to say if she'll remember her parents after she's older, but one thing is for sure, she is in good hands. Now that the hull of the ship has been repaired and completely fixed, it is time for us to begin working on the internal parts of this section of the ship, which will include 4 laser turrets that came off of the Corvette, as well as 2 very large coolant tanks and also a shuttle bay. And even after all that, we still have plenty of room left for some more internal infrastructure if we would like. We would also go ahead and spend the resources to build ourselves a proper shuttle, which will be much faster than our jet car or even our Battletoad. This will make boarding enemy ships so much simpler, but unfortunately it can only hold 1 crewman. We then would have Captain Udo begin working on some docking clamps at the back side of the Reaper. That way we can attach the Dart via those docking clamps. Essentially, this should make the Dart exactly what we want, a ship that is actually part of the Star Reaper, but only temporarily when we want it to be. That way we can detach it anytime we like and send it down to the planet to destroy our enemies and even collect some sweet succulent resources and items. Resources and items that will be very crucial to expanding out our ship ever further, even though it's pretty darn long. Our ODST prisoner Lagua had lost her marbles and decided to go berserk and try to break out, but we put a stop to that pretty quick. She probably had some courage since I forgot to strip her armor from her. After I done that, I noticed that she actually had a jump pack. This would explain how those ODSTs were moving so well through the void of space in EVA. I gave it to Porkins for now. It could be worth investing in many of these for our crewmates, especially those that we send to board other ships. But first we need to organize. I feel like our storage is all over the place, and quite frankly that's because it actually is. So we began moving all of our shelves to this back portion of the the ship, and this way we have all of our items and resources in one area, making it that much easier for construction projects. I had also planned on building a new shield generator back here to protect our engines. But before we even had the chance to begin working on a new shield generator, we had yet another ship battle. It would appear to be the torpedo destroyer of a bunch of bounty hunters, looking to collect those sweet, sweet bags of silver on our heads. This destroyer, though, is an absolute Goliath. I fear that we may have met our match, my friends. It may be best for us to try to run away from this battle, and that's exactly what we decided to do. We were going to retreat and try to regroup. We couldn't take on a destroyer at this time, let alone one that could bombard our shields with torpedoes, immediately taking them down. Truth be told, this was going quite well at first. Our shields were holding off the torpedoes, and we had enough engines to escape. And then our shields gave out. We then started losing many of our engines, making it impossible to escape or even advance against the enemy. We of course began returning fire as well as sending our battle toad and our boarding shuttle, but by this time we were getting completely decimated. I'm afraid that the Reaper's fate was sealed. Most of our crew would try to escape to the back portion of the Reaper since the hull was much thicker back there, with only a small structural walkway holding together the two sections of the ship. Nonetheless, as things became more and more bleak, the crew would still try to stay together, protecting each other, especially those that are most vulnerable, such as young Jingles, who would have to stay in a room where she can breathe, of course. But I'm afraid with another blast of plasma, the back portion of the ship would be completely separated from the rest of the Reaper and thrown into the void of space. This did not kill them, however, as they were simply separated from the rest of the ship and the crew. They were completely safe. Well, as safe as they could be given the circumstances. There was still the issue of the enemy bounty hunter crew that had boarded this portion of the ship as well as the other portion. They didn't have too much of an issue putting him down though. However, on the other half of the Reaper, Zap Zap and Tetsuya were having a little bit of trouble with the enemies there, forced to engage in a gunfight in what was left of our kitchens and hallways. Sam, Henry, and the captain were also having some issues with the crew of the torpedo destroyer. But this was interrupted by an orbit failure notification. I went to look at it and it was saying that of course one portion of the ship is going to be falling through the atmosphere within a day because of course it's lost power. But this wasn't the worst of it. When I went to look at the half that was losing orbit, I noticed that Zap Zap and Tetsuya were completely surrounded by plasma blasts that were about to hit the ship. And there's nothing I could do to stop it. I don't even know what to say, to be honest with you. I'm afraid that there's no time for us to mourn our friends right now, though, as we have much more pressing matters at hand. Because if we don't manage to stop this destroyer and its crew, there won't be anyone or anything left for us to return to. The torturous marauders will be no more. And by God, that is not something that we're going to just sit idly by and let happen. We will die trying. The bounty hunting crew was putting up one hell of a fight. Their armor was extremely durable as well, taking several hits from our rockets before it eventually gave out, and as did the crewmen. After finishing off what remained of those outside, we would then turn our attention to the airlocks, trying to destroy them with our rockets as well. However, the ship's hull foam distributor would constantly patch the holes that we were making in the ship, making it extremely difficult for us to even try to enter. We had somehow managed to get Sam past the hull foam, and thus Henry and Captain Udo were trying to break it down so that they could enter as well, while she breached the airlock. Now, normally in a situation like this, we could take our time and get the crew through the hull foam or figure out some other way inside. But since we only had 24 hours before our ship burned up in the atmosphere, time was of the essence. And because of that, Sam couldn't wait for the others. She would have to go in alone for the time being until the others somehow managed to find a way inside. She would encounter several ship defenses as well as more bounty hunters, giving us an ample opportunity when she blew them all to hell to enter. We would then try to sloppily and destructively move all throughout the ship looking for the control room, blowing everything all to hell, We didn't care who we hit or even if we hit ourselves by accident. The consequences of an untimely solution were so much worse than anything that a rocket could do to us. We would finally find the control room, and as their crew began to flee the area, we noticed that Captain Udo had collapsed due to blood loss. It would seem that we are all almost out of time. Henry would stay behind and begin tending to Captain Udo's wounds to ensure that he doesn't die. Naturally, this means that Sam will have to enter the control room on her own and begin trying to hack the pilot console. Damn, another failure. As always, it would seem it's going to take quite a few attempts before Sam can really work her magic on this ship. Though it doesn't seem that we'll be having any issues out of the crew, as they were all suffocated to death in the hallway and/or kitchen. The cowards would have rather died than face this. Can't say I blame them, really. After several hours and one final attempt, the ship was ours, and after a very well-deserved sigh of relief, I believe that reality really started to set in for the crew. The destroyer was ours, yes, and we had totally won the battle. But look at what we've lost. So much. Damn near everything. With our solemn victory in hand, Captain Udo would begin manning the destroyer. It was time for us to retrieve our home and our friends. We would begin positioning the destroyer just outside the wreckage and remains of the Reaper. Truthfully, this portion of the ship was less of the original Star Reaper and more of the trade ship that had been added onto it. Regardless though, we would end up using our salvage bay to retrieve the other part, in something of a brief attempt to piece them back together, though truly I wasn't trying to connect them, just more of get the shape back to how the ship looked and also retrieve everyone that was on board, as well as all of our devices, components, and just the chunks in general. If I can be honest, we were all a bit overwhelmed. This was a lot. We had lost so much, and I know I keep saying that, but we had worked so hard on the Reaper. I suppose, though, at the very least, those that were alive, and that was something to be grateful for. Like Lyle and young baby Jingles here. It then began to dawn on us that we are pirates, scavengers, thieves even. But better than that, we are survivors. We are resourceful. And yes, this episode we have lost a few crew members as well as our first mate, Zap Zap, our friends. But they know, just as we know now, that this is the life of a pirate. And by God, dying at the hands of enemy steel or gigantic plasma explosions in the vastness of space is a much more honorable death than on our knees or in some prison cell. We will not be giving up anytime soon. First things first, we need to ensure that this destroyer is 100% operational and safe for us. So we're actually going to be using our salvage bay to collect chunks from the Reaper and add on to the destroyer by welding them in place. We would then begin expending new resources for new hull plating as well as hull on the internal and external portions of the destroyer. Then finally, once those new portions are completed, we will then begin repairing the old portions that are already in place, as well as any electronics that have been damaged in our little explosive escapades when taking it over. However, these efforts would end up being paused for a brief moment as the captain called everyone into the control room. It may not be the most beautiful of sights for the occasion, but the captain decided to give a riveting, exciting motivational speech. Given the circumstances, it felt quite fitting, and hopefully everyone gets a mood buff from it, making their work just a little bit more easier for them. Now that the destroyer's been patched up, we needed a proper name for it, so I decided to name it Zap Zap's Dart, obviously in honor of our first mate, as well as the previous dart that we had that has been blown to bits, essentially. Speaking of which, that brings up the question, what do we do with all the wreckage that we have from the Reaper and the Dart? With enough engines, they could make for one hell of a ship, or we could even try to attach them to the destroyer, but since it's going to be our invasion ship when we land on planets like the Dart was, I don't really think that would be the best plan. Instead, perhaps, maybe, we could build them into something of a space station above the planet. I mean, we don't have a slip space drive anyway, so it's not like we're going anywhere anytime anytime soon, and if we did get one, we could attach it to the station itself. But I think that we've learned our lesson from the battle earlier, that running from the UNSC and bounty hunters is not the solution. It's nothing more than a death sentence to run from them, but digging in our heels and planting our roots above this planet as a well-known pirate space station, that might be a solution. Of course though, don't get me wrong, with that being said, there is a plethora of repairs that need to be completed right now, which we're going to be working on, as well as many other construction projects and just things in general that we need to do before this space station is anything more than just some wreckage with some lasers and shields. But of course, we're not afraid to put in the work. We'll get this bad boy up and running in no time. Now, I wasn't all that happy with the shape that the station was taking at first, so I decided to cut the engine portion here on the western side off and use our salvage bay to flip it around to put it on the southern end and connect up all the power once more. I feel that this gives us a better shape for the station, but not only that, it also will mean that it'll be easier for us to protect all sides of the station with our shields. Speaking of which, we would also end up building a new large shield generator for the western side of the station as well, which will actually give us 3 in total on the station and also gives us something of an overlapping defense system for the entire thing. Realistically, I think another big thing that we need to try to work on is heat sinks and coolant, especially for this many shields and reactors, but that's something we'll have to do in the very near future. Because as for right now that we have the station operational and sustainable, we need to give it a proper name as well, and of course we are going to be going with Star Reaper Station. It felt quite fitting. We would then begin repairing the southern section that will actually go into the engine room, though we have already put in some hidden wires, that way we can ensure the entire station is getting power from it. Right now the entire station is basically, well, extremely unorganized. There's no other way to put it. We have engines to the south and to the east, maybe even some to the left. We have heat sinks and everything all over the place, but eventually we will kind of sort that out. It's just going to take quite a while, of course, because we have to deconstruct around those and move them with a salvage bay, or deconstruct them completely and rebuild them, which is not preferable. Now, those of you with a keen eye have probably noticed that our mechs around the station are not being controlled anymore, and the reason for that is because Adam, our ship AI, is offline, meaning that our mechs are just roaming around meaninglessly without any consciousness to actually guide them. So unfortunately, I don't believe I'll be naming them anytime soon. Now, we do have a drone core that is actually aboard Zap Zap's Dart, but unfortunately it's not the same as a computer core, which is what is required to have an AI. And I know what you're thinking. You're probably saying, Rat Knight, why don't you just build another one? Well, I would love to do that, but unfortunately we need a persona core, which we do not have, and it seems quite hard to find one to purchase. However, it is possible to obtain one through a quest, so perhaps some faction on the planet will make us an offer. Though it is worth noting that once we do get another persona core and we're able to build another advanced computer, the AI will not be Adam. It would seem that he is gone for good. Though there are mods that allow you to build persona cores, so if it would be alright with you guys and that's something you would like, I could add those. However, as for now, we are going to be bringing Zap Zap's Dart down towards the station and we are going to be docking them together. Luckily, the docking ports did survive on the old Star Reaper. This should allow for ease of access between the vessel and the station, but not only that, if I'm not mistaken, and I very well could be, I believe they should share a heat capacity and everything through the docking ports as well, making them one vessel whenever we have to engage in combat with enemy ships. But my friends, as we wind down to the end of the episode here, I do have some lore for you. First up, from our compadre Drone Attack, with some lore about Boyd, the crewman that we purchased from Kigyar Pirates at the end of last episode. So Boyd was actually captured during a battle between the UNSC and the Kigyar Pirates, as the UNSC was surrendering and he was the last of his crew. Though Captain Udo found this as a negative trait, the positives outweighed the negatives, like his amazing shooting skill. I really like this lore, and I think that it actually really fits with his skill set as well as his adulthood in-game backstory as an artifact hunter. Perhaps Boyd was actually part of some type of research vessel like the one that we captured and turned into the Star Reaper. Now, as for his childhood being a medieval lordling, I believe that this may have taken place on some type type of backwater outer colony planet where technology was quite limited, and thus he joined the UNSC for a much better life. Though as a medieval lordling, I mean, he would probably have a pretty good life overall, but nothing like what they would have in the UNSC with modern technology. Next up for lore, we have some lore from our friend the Bob_Bob, who is actually coming to us with a great name and some lore about our clean sweeper. Now, unfortunately, I'm not able to name the clean sweeper right now, but I do plan on naming it Scourgebot when we have the chance after we have a new AI. And also, you were saying that Captain Udo's crew was skilled in plundering and navigating the treacherous cosmic sea, but their swashbuckling lifestyle left the ship in a constant state of disarray. To keep the vessel in tip-top shape, Captain Udo thought of a solution that would ensure his crew remained focused on their tyrannical pursuits without being bogged down by mundane chores. Some really great lore that I think fits with the pirates, because why would they clean up after themselves, but it's also something that needs to be done. Last but not least, we have some lore from our friend SlyWimWig8071, who was saying that the reason that random pirates keep attacking us is because we are currently top of the pirate food chain at the moment, and even a legend per se. They don't see the cannons on the ship, but instead the idea of what potential loot a pirate clan as ourselves might have. I think that this also makes a lot of sense as well, since pirates are kind of opportunist, right? If they see an opportunity, they're definitely going to take it, especially one where they can get a lot of resources, items, or even a brand new ship, just as we would have done given the opportunity as well. So thank you guys ever so much for the lore. Remember, if you want to submit any lore, feel free to do so in the comment section down below for the possibility of having your lore added to this series. But I want to thank you guys ever so much for watching. Once again, I love you guys, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.